So I think it is time for us to start. As a matter of fact, we are only 25 minutes late, which, considering how we were late earlier today, has been an incredible earning of time. But at the same time, as you all know, we thought that it might be advisable to stop a little earlier in order to allow our guests to have a short visit of Trento. Considering also that at the end of the afternoon, the idea was to have a public presentation of the 4 volumes edited by Charles Glenn and Jan de Groof. I'm afraid that we are going to, we don't have the presence of Fulvio Cortese, who has a flu. He's a very talented professor of administrative law in this law school. And I regret very much that because of his health he cannot be present, which means, though, that we can save a little time on that, although I would like Jan de Groof, who's one of the 2 co-editors present, to say something. I think it is very important because from the very title it gives, I think, important highlights on the work of Ela. So I would start our session this afternoon, knowing that we have again the duetto later on, but at the end of the first 2 presentations, and knowing also that because there has been a sacrifice in the discussion of the Italian Trentino experience, questions and remarks and comments will be welcome also on the second session of this morning. Of course, it is a little bit more difficult to chair the session this afternoon because Gracienne has left an imprint on the role of what a good chair is supposed to do. She has been absolutely impeccable in making a sort of a resume of the presentation that were made, highlighting the best part, generously forgetting the weakest part of the presentations. I don't have the same ability that Gracienne has, so I really think I'll just give the green light, red light, and of course, when it is late, the orange light. So it is now my pleasure to give the floor to Paul Zontiens from Tilburg University, a very distinguished university and a very distinguished scholar. So you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I was asked to tell something about the governance of education in a multicultural society, I thought about this term, multicultural society, because it is a disputed term in my country. A lot of political controversies go about the understanding of what is a multicultural society. It refers, in our view, to the problems of accommodating a large group of people with a non-Western background from families that do not share our secularized values and do not speak our language in private. The core groups in this respect are the descendants of the former Turkish and Moroccan guest workers, in both cases some 350,000 people. They are concentrated in the poorer quarters of cities as Rotterdam, The Hague and Amsterdam. This rather negative connotation of the term multicultural society is the outcome of heated debates that came in our parliament and that came with the rise of especially right-wing populist movement, now led by Geert Wilders, maybe known outside.
Well known.
Yes, I'm sorry, but
sadly well known.
This right-wing movement has colored the discussion at the principal discussion in great many ways. But my country has a tradition of having principled discussions about everything, especially religion, but also to be pragmatic. And while the politicians are discussing principally about what is going on in the multicultural society, studies appear now saying that integration is going fast of the groups that are in the light of the criticism. And especially in terms of language policy, there is some progress. I think especially because government doesn't do too much about it, especially at the central level. Schools have a tradition of being autonomous, have a free space in which they can fill their subjects dependent on what is wanted in a school. So Turkish language, if possible, you can get at certain schools, and also Arabian languages, if there's a need for it. That means that what is happening at the decentral level, outside news, outside papers, outside the public discussion, is much more decisive than what is going on in politics. Despite Geert Wilders, we are maybe a civilized country, and we are developing like that. That's my hope. What I wanted to share with you are our experiences with Muslim schools, because they say a lot about our system of education and about how difficult it is to integrate certain groups in our society. I first have to try to explain what is the principal right of education in my country. The Dutch constitution allows groups in society on grounds of religion or philosophical conviction to raise denominational schools that are eligible for full funding by the state. We have denominational schools that are funded or not funded. We don't know partially funded schools like Great Britain has. We have only, when the schools are funded, they are fully funded. According to this principle that has been introduced in 1917, at the beginning of the 20th century, 2/3 of the 7,000 schools in primary and 700 schools in general secondary education is of a private, non-governmental character. Most of them are Catholic or Protestant, but there are also Hindu schools, Jewish schools, Steiner schools, so-called general non-governmental schools, and of course, Muslim schools. The Muslim schools are the most visible image of trial and error in our multicultural society. Since the beginning of the 90s, we have got some 40 new schools on a population of more than 1 million Muslims in the Netherlands. Now that just 1% of the Muslims visits these schools, one cannot say that they paved the way to emancipation of this group. Emancipation of religious groups happened to be the main reason for allowing fully state-funded non-governmental schools in our system. In fact, Muslims sent their children to the already existing Catholic, Protestant or public schools, often dependent on the close proximity to home. Furthermore, a growing Muslim middle class is more interested in quality education than own schools. Nevertheless, how small their number may be, the reason of existence of Muslim schools has always been disputed, not only after 9/11 but also before, in the 90s. 3 issues were in debate. First, there was fear during the 90s and the first years of this century that they would form a threat for the Western values, the rule of law and state security. There were allegations that foreign countries from the Near and Middle East were influencing curriculum and social climate at the Muslim schools, but these concerns were largely alleviated after reassuring investigations on this point by the Dutch Intelligence Service and the School Inspectorate. The main conclusion of the Intelligence Service was that the fact that these schools were fully funded by the Dutch state and that this funding was accompanied by many rules of a legal nature appeared to be an effective barrier against strange influences from foreign powers. The second issue that was in debate were complaints that the rise of new Muslim schools could lead to bad and black schools, if we call them, where members of groups of an alien ethnic background who do not control the Dutch language properly are desegregated from other groups in society. These kinds of worries have led to several political initiatives to discourage the founding of new schools without discriminating against Muslims. The most feasible contribution to this debate has been given by the National Educational Council, which recently recommended to tie initial government approval of subsidizing new schools to conditions to guarantee quality education and the integrity of the school organization within the context of the democratic legal order. In 2011, the Dutch government declared that measures to diminish black schools by policies to influence and to limit the individual school choice proved to be ineffective and should have less priority in the future. Instead, the government stipulated that a strong emphasis on general measures to guarantee and to improve quality education should also serve the black schools. This announcement led to critical reactions. Still, in 2005, the National Education Council had advised to develop a policy for the elimination of black schools because on moral grounds, and remotely referring to the Brown case of the US Supreme Court of 1954, one cannot allow that different groups of children grow up in different settings and places. The third issue were some incidents with respect to administrative failure and the spending of public funding by school boards in a manner contrary to the law. It appeared that a certain kind of clientelism was common on several places, by creating shadow jobs from family members and by paying generously for advices given by acquainted people. A discussion about the administrative integrity of Islamic schools rose. The adoption of a new law in 2010, which enables the minister to interfere on the administrative level in public or non-government schools in cases of severe mismanagement, brought a solution for the time being. So far, there's reason to conclude that problems of the multicultural society were a factor in the development of more intensified and stronger government policies towards schools education, be it public or non-governmental schools. These new policies concern more emphasis on quality education and more possibilities for government to interfere in the management and governance of schools. Yet, reality is often faster and more complicated than laws can predict. 2 weeks ago, the Minister of Education stopped subsidizing Ibn Galdoon, the name of the last Muslim school in general secondary education, because, as he said, the school is not capable to perform properly in the years to come, so that the reason for subsidy lost its ground. Over the years, Ibn Galdoon had developed a doubtful reputation in managerial and qualitative respect as well. The event that provoked this governmental action took place in June this year, and it appeared that pupils of that Rotterdam Muslim school had stolen 26 different official documents holding questions and assignments for the national exams in secondary education at the end of the last school year. Since the national exams take place in the premises of the school, every school receives these documents some weeks before. Schools usually keep these documents in a safe. But the officials of the Ibn Galdoon school did not. They had put them in a room that was locked and had put them on a table. The thieves had reached the room by entering through a window. It all started to be a big case when people discovered that the exams in French for pre-university education were placed on the internet. Soon it became clear that the thieves did not only have kept these documents for themselves, but had disseminated them by mail and social media. Besides the thieves, the public prosecution service has interrogated some 70 pupils from all kinds of contaminated schools. There are not many people in the Netherlands who do not agree with plans to close down the Ibn Galdoon school. But the minister has a problem. In fact, he has not the power of stopping the subsidy. The law gives two grounds for that: an insufficient number of pupils or very bad quality education. Neither one or the other is the case. The inspectorate concluded that quality education at Ibn Galdoon was vulnerable, but not bad. Although the school used a lot of ungraduated or undergraduated teachers, this could perhaps be a ground for sanctions, but not a reason to stop subsidy immediately. In fact, because of a shortage of teachers in secondary education, the official policy is to allow teachers in class that have no sufficient training, be it only on a temporary basis. Should we change the law then? The politicians are not in favor for that. Beside the point that nobody knows what and how we should change, there is a general feeling that government is at the end of its possibilities to interfere in school life when abnormal, controversial and negative things happen. New instruments could give too much pressure on the system, in which the vast majority of the institutions and schools do well. That all leaves us with a question, and I will end with this: how much freedom of education for institutions is accountable in the diverse multicultural societies? That question is at the moment at stake in my country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was Marlene this morning who started our proceedings by saying that different countries have different problems and different approaches. And this is confirmed also by your presentation. Although I would add, but this was also her assumption, that we all have to learn from other experiences, although there may be and there are diversities in situations and in approaches. So that was very interesting. And let me just recall the fact that the Netherlands is always regarded as a model country when it comes to diversity and education. So in a way, it's even more interesting to see what kind of problems you have to cope with nowadays. So I want to ask if there's any question or comment from you, and I would like to give the floor to Gracienne Lauwe, so we proceed and have, you want to? Okay.
Just for information, who is running these non-governmental schools? The churches or the Muslim communities or parents associations or business or single persons, entrepreneurs, and who gets the money?
Officially, they are governed by legal persons, just not with no ties to churches or whatsoever. So these are profane bodies. Yes, and they are legal persons without an objective of making profit.
Yes.
So this case, do you think that after this accumulation of bad practices in that school, dealing with quality, with lack of capacity and so on, but do you think this could arrive, this incident could arrive on distributing copies for exams, that could arrive in a white Protestant or Catholic school also? It was an incident. Learners or their parents took the initiative to take away exams without any doubt. That's unlawful. But it is not just typical for Islamic school, if I may a little bit be provocative. So do you think that the minister should take the same measures if it was dealing with the casus in Catholic school or in Protestant school?
Well, it's a good question, because I am convinced with you that it has nothing to do with the Islamic character of the schools. It has to do with people in that schools that are not familiar with our way of working, given the fact that the examination assignments and questions are normally put in safes, in vaults by schools, and they did not. That means that they're not familiar with how to deal with that. And it's more a cultural factor than a religious factor that makes it different.
I thought you wanted to add something. Your eyes speak for yourselves. So.
Yeah. Well, there's a real tradition in Netherlands about and tension about the presence of Islamic schools. And to my interfere, it was, and what I have heard from Islamic involved people in education, that in the 80s they didn't want to set up their own schools. They wanted to be recognized in the schools, but they didn't feel recognized. So that's why they used the possibilities to set up their own schools. And that's one direction I want to supplement. Another is in the 90s, there was a huge operation in Netherlands to scale up school sizes. So that was a policy for the whole education, and what I've heard from inside information, that it was also really motivated by the issue of avoiding new schools like the Islamic schools.
Yes.
From a legal point of view, it's quite the question you raised at the very end of your speech was also quite interesting. Namely, has the minister the power to close down schools? And on what kind of legal grounds? Misuse of sources, maladministration, fraud, corruption, lack of transparency. But here it is quite bizarre, because it was just penalizing the whole educational community. And parents are victim, parents of other learners are victim, so there was no legal ground at all. But what is your analysis and your proposal? Should the inspectorate or should the minister have the capacity in some circumstances to close down schools?
No, the minister was aware of the fact that he had no sufficient ground in the law, and he reached an agreement with the school board. And the agreement means that the school will close down to fire all teachers and to create a new teachers corps, and then they will have a new start.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
After the killing of these Dutch filmmakers, the German newspapers reported that the Dutch educational system, this pluralistic structure, has failed and will be ended. So this was the way this was commented in Germany, in the German newspapers.
No, I wouldn't say that it has failed. The National Educational Council published a report about freedom of education last year, and one of the central theses was that our freedom, which is laid down in our constitution, gives space to all kinds of opinions and religions, and is working well. Is really working well. The problem that we have is that under the pressure of right-wing populists, we always are bashing Islamic phenomena, Islamic people and Islamic institutions.
The reason for this discussion in Germany was that problems in my country we have with this. look at the Dutch. They were the model, and now that's failed, so we don't bother anymore. Yeah.
Well, they have maybe their own political motivation for that.
Now, if I may, before we give the floor to Gracien, I would like to make this reflection with you, considering also that we have now the presence of a legal anthropologist who is in front of us, Giorgia De Carli. Let me recall a distinction which a leading scholar and an anthropologist made between legal pluralism in a strong sense and in a weak sense. According to Griffith, we have legal pluralism in a strong sense if pluralism is allowed to exist and produce its effect without any recognition by the state. We have legal pluralism in a weak sense if the operation of different legal traditions depends on an acknowledgement by the legal system of the state. So that we can transfer this definition to pluralism in education, educational. And here we have, I would say, educational pluralism in a weak sense when there is an obligation of conformity, of consistency with the general system. And in a strong sense, if an educational system is irrespective of any acknowledgement by the state or by the government, perhaps this would be the situation of homeschool, which operates irrespective of any acknowledgement by the state. What I would like to underline is that the growth of the Western idea of pluralism has always been very relative, very much dependent on the obligation to conformity, on the acknowledgement of the authority of the state to draw the line between what was admissible and what was not admissible. But the assumption was that we were living within a spectrum of diversities that was intrinsically compatible. Now pluralism is challenged precisely on a different ground, on what had been not experienced before when the growth of pluralism took place. And this is a true challenge, I would say, because there are suspicions, there are lacks of confidence, because pluralism has gone too far, and we cannot but apply the principle of equality to diversities that were not in mind when plurality was constructed, even physically constructed. And I think this is one of the consequences. So do we want to stick to our tradition of respect for pluralism, or do we want to restrict it? And I think that the experience of the Netherlands is very interesting precisely because it indicates the possibility of one direction instead of another. The political populism to which you refer is present everywhere. And for instance, it's very much present also in Central and Eastern European countries. So it's not only in the West, it is all over Europe where we are experiencing this. And so I would say that perhaps one of the roles of ELA is also to be alert, to keep alert on the indications of the restriction of the areas of freedom and pluralism that we are experiencing, at least in order to gain awareness of the phenomenon. And then, of course, it will be to policymakers to make decide. It will be up to the public, not certainly to ELA. But ELA should make the public alert of this trend which may take place. Okay, sorry for taking too long, but your paper was really provocative, and I thought I thought I could transform it into my own terminology. But now really we should give the floor to Gracien. Thank you very much, and you have up to 20 minutes.
Thank you very much. Just before starting, I would like to mention that the Flemish community has a little bit the same structure as the Netherlands, which means a majority of state-funded, fully state-funded private educational institutions. Contrary to the Netherlands, we are a country of eternal compromise and eternal disputes as well. And I think after having listened to the provocative presentation of Paul Zoontjes, I will now discuss how the Flemish community tries to find a compromise and deal with the same problems, actually, just across the border. So, with the exception of pensions for teachers and school officials, minimum requirements for diplomas in the beginning, and end of compulsory education, the Flemish, French, and German-speaking communities are responsible for regulating education in their respective regions. I will now discuss the situation in the Flemish community. When regulating education, they have to take into account the principle of autonomy of schools and independence of schools, of school providers, which include freedom to choose teaching methods, independence in management and operation. Of course, the state inspectorate, just like in the Netherlands, controls whether schools use the resources according to the law and whether they reach the targets. Historically, the legislator did not interfere in education to regulate the integration of migrants in education, at least till 1991, with the rise of extreme right parties in the Flemish community. In 1991, after the Black Sunday, the lagging behind of migrant children in education was recognized, and the legislator put into place the educational priority policy, aimed at creating equal education opportunities for all socially disadvantaged, especially including migrants, but also including socially disadvantaged natives. But it was thereby recognized that migrants have to deal with additional problems caused by ethnical and cultural differences. The four policy actions differentiated: first, recognition of learning gaps of pupils, on the one hand, what we call achterstand. Second, the behavior of teachers to have low expectations for migrant children, calling achterstelling. Third, inadequate methods to deal with differences between pupils. And fourth, the need for extra language support to help newcomers get into regular education. These were the four priority actions. 10 years later, in 2001, the effect of this priority policy was deemed too limited, and the Flemish community once again embarked on a comprehensive integration through education policy with the so-called equal opportunities in education law. This time, it was an integrated support policy to combat exclusion, combat segregation, and to combat discrimination in education, especially, once again, for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. The law thereby established a series of indicators for granting additional resources to schools and integrated support for schools. Some indicators, for instance, the language used in the family, are directly linked with migration, while other indicators, such as the diploma of the mother, are not linked with migration at all. It is clear that this policy and these resources were not aimed at equal opportunities for migrants only, but at equal opportunities for all, once again. Another 10 years later, in 2011, we embarked on another initiative, the so-called new inscription in school law. It was voted in the Flemish Parliament, which organizes the inscriptions in primary and secondary education as from this school year. Parents have a free choice of inscription in schools, and schools have to conduct registration according to strict rules, including priority rules for registration in their school, aiming at the realization of the objective of a social and multi-ethnic mixed, in each school, especially in urban regions. This includes a set of priority registration criteria for specific social and ethnic groups of pupils. So to conclude, since 1991, more than 20 years of policy making aimed at the realization of integration through education evolved from voluntary initiatives to strictly legislative principles that moreover limit the autonomy of schools in regulating especially access to the schools and the social and multi-ethnic mix in schools. It took years for politicians to reach this difficult compromise with society and the need for society to recognize the need for special support measures aimed at integration, the requirement to limit the autonomy of schools to regulate their own access, and the priority of social cohesion through education as the priorities that oblige education providers to function and manage and operate the schools accordingly. This is the present situation, the present balance that politics and society achieved in adapting the educational system to the migration flows in Belgium. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you very much. It recalls me of what Olga Bombardelli said this morning about the importance of the environment. But as lawyers, I think that just as much as we give importance to the environment, we had to give importance to the law, because that's where the system places itself. That's where, if you like, according to the majority rule, the system has found a balance. And also when it comes to society, you have, I would say, forces which are quite inconsistent one with the other. You have populism and you have more open-minded approaches. And, it's very interesting, but we need a balance, and only the law can give the balance. Only attitude, and you have even some excesses. And let me just put another seed for discussion, just because this morning we didn't have time to go deeper into it. You notice that Olga drew a great distinction between the intercultural approach and the multicultural approach. Now, this is something which is quite important in Italy, and it has been recalled also by Paul earlier. Multicultural means acknowledging differences and preserving them. Intercultural approach should mean to overcome differences, which means that in order to overcome differences, you have somehow to give up something of your own identity, of the identity of the majority and the like, and create something new. So that it's not, let's say, ideologically neutral to take the approach of multiculturalism or the approach of interculturalism. This is a very much debated topic in Italy. And mind you, the official policy stands from the Ministry of Education in Italy are all in favor of interculturalism, which means not preserving differences, but overcoming differences. I personally have my own reservations about it. I would say that acknowledging and respecting diversity is the first necessary step in order to frame any policy, regardless of what the ultimate goal is. But it is precisely when the ultimate goal is to giving up part of your identity, then populism comes in. Because, you know, they will say, why should I give up something of my own identity if I am in my own homeland? The foreigner should. And this, here and I said this because in a way I'm introducing the way for your show. Is it the time for your show?
The show.
Okay.
Yes. Elaborate a little bit on this new inscription policy. Quotas, who makes the decision? Is this controlled by the government?
Yes.
If it does the school, are there cases?
Yes, there are, of course, and there is also a special mechanism established to fight discussions. But it was a very expensive procedure because they established a database. So people have to register online. Schools lost control of the registration, you agree? Before, especially state-funded private educational institutions, in order to protect their identity. For a Catholic school, they wanted their children to come from Christian or Catholic backgrounds. This is not possible anymore. Parents choose the school of their choice. So when balancing the fundamental rights, it was a long discussion. Should we give priority to the freedom of education providers, or should we give priority to the freedom of the user of education? And contrary to Austria, and that is due to the fact that we have a majority of state-funded educational institutions, the legislator said no. First, we give priority of choice, freedom of choice to the user. Parents choose the school of their choice, but in order to grant also, or to respect the fundamental, the constitutional freedom of educational providers, parents, when making their choice, should agree formally with the school project. So Muslim parents choosing for a Catholic school, they know that they are going to send their children to a Catholic school, and they will have to respect the Catholic identity of that school. It means that, for example, they cannot require Islam instruction in the Catholic schools, what they have automatically in the public schools. So you see the very sensitive balancing. First, priority to the choice of the parents, but once you choose a choice, it ends. You have made your choice, and then it is the full freedom of the school to implement in methodology, management, and operation the identity that the school providers have developed for their school. How it is done in practice, as I said, a database. So you just, when you have a child that you want to register, you put, you make a selection of 3 schools in the database. And there are priority rules, for example, brothers and sisters. The idea is from a practical point of view. Otherwise, parents have in the morning to run from one school to another. So once that there is one child in the school, the others receive priorities. And then it's the system who is looking itself, and as a parent, at a certain moment, you receive a letter that you can go to the school and register your child in that school. You have a certain period. If you do not register your child in that school, well, you lost your right, and you have to wait when another school is assigned. So it was a very sensitive issue, because we have this majority of educational institutions with their specific denomination, and as a consequence, in some Catholic schools, you end now up with a majority of Muslims. And then the discussions start, well, the headscarf, Islamic instruction, and you have to say, no, this is a contract. When making your choice, you made your choice, and now it's up to you to respect the identity and the denomination in the school. Otherwise, you should have chosen another school. And I think now a little bit the discussions after 10 years of discussion, schools, teachers, parents, everybody got used to the system. But as you see, the freedom of educational providers has seriously, I would say, been limited, because you, as a teacher, you take into account that sending Muslim pupils to church practices, that's problematic, of course. They could do it, but in reality. No, private state-funded schools. All schools. All schools. Everybody, yes, everybody receiving state funds, whether you are private, denominational, or public schools, everybody receiving state funding is going through that registration, official registration procedure, and only when you are fully private, which means registration fees of 10,000 or 32,000 for international baccalaureates or the European schools, then it's up to you to register, to regulate your own access.
They have no state funds in that.
Then they have no state funds at all. So everybody receiving funds have to respect these rules. No, everybody who receives money, and then they forget about the freedom of educational providers, first freedom of choice of the parents. Yes? You receive money from the state, you pass for concerning access through the system of registration. You don't make your own choice anymore what kind of parents and what kind of pupils you will have in your school. So that is really limiting the freedom of educational providers. Yes?
Four of us will want to say something, and I would just add language schools in South Tyrol, that perhaps Elisabetta, you have to register either in an Italian school or in a German-speaking school with a number of consequences. Olga, you're first.
Yes, it was about intercultural. Maybe you want to say something about Gracien? Yes. So back. So I thank you, Professor Toniatti, for referring to multicultural, intercultural. In fact, it is, I think, the most debated question, because it is very, very difficult to decide what we really want to do. In the past, it was assimilation. Italian immigrants going to America should become Americans, and so on. Nowadays, the difference among multicultural, intercultural is complicated, because it doesn't mean only, it should be never canceling differences. It should be finding connections among my difference and your difference and their difference. Not only, but for example, German things I read, as I say, if we respect too much the differences, or if we emphasize difference, we create the ghettos, and we create classes. So social classes are not anymore red, black collar, come si dice, colletti bianchi e colletti azzurri.
Blue
Yes.
colors.
But they are ethnic social classes, so the problematic is really very complicated. But mostly is never cancelling differences, of course. That should be
overcoming differences.
Yes. Overcoming, yes, it is not cancelling. But really it is a big discussion, because the risk is very big that when we say we respect that, for some thinkers it means we are not helping them, but we create ghettos. We put them in a lower class because we leave them all their problems to integrate in our society. It is, of course, a big dispute to find the right solution. Thank you for having a remark.
But of course, it can be a way for dodging multiculturalism and allowing assimilation to go. That's the Italian way, I would say, the smart way. Let's call it interculturalism, so we give a proper name to assimilation. But anyway, you are.
Which is relevant is multi-ethnical country, multi-ethnic identity, because both intercultural and multicultural are value related. I'm distracted by this sound, but okay. But let's keep that. I was interested. You mentioned in the first generation of policy in Belgium about these low expectations. And we discussed it in the break also about the importance of low expectations, because if you have a low expectation, I as a teacher would give you as a student less minutes to give an answer. I question you less, I give you less homework, I give you less attention, I give you less rewards. So we know it is very important. What are your ideas about looking after all these policies, about how this can be addressed? Or shouldn't it be addressed?
Yes, of course, it should be addressed in teacher education, how they need to deal with it. as a lawyer, I'm not teaching myself to multi-ethnic groups, but I think we should ask those who train VAC didactics, how do you deal with these multicultural, how do you support them, what kind of measures? There are special measures. For example, schools with a lot of multi-ethnic composition and social disadvantaged criteria, I said in the next phase, they receive special support. So it means that it is possible that they have 2 teachers in 1 class, which is not possible in white schools. And then there is 1 teacher who deals with these children with low expectations and to give them additional support when the other teacher is giving lectures and sees that, well, some pupils in the class are not following and are lagging behind and lose concentration. Then the other takes 3, 4 children apart and deals with it separately. So yes, there have been put measures into place to deal with it, but there is also a responsibility of parents, because we see the Chinese, for example, and the Russians, even when they come to Belgium without any knowledge of Dutch. Yes, when they come, the Chinese and the Russians, when they come to Belgium without any knowledge of Dutch, we see that the language is not an issue after some weeks. And that's because these parents have high expectations, higher than the ordinary Belgian Flemish. So they push their children in studying. And of course, that's connected with the migration flows that we had. In Belgium, contrary to Canada, we had migration from Maghreb countries for people coming from rural villages to work in the mines. Parents couldn't write, let alone that they could read literature to their children, not at all, and they have low expectations in education for their own children. So one of the things that should be tackled is to deal with the low expectations of the parents. It's not only a problem of low expectations of the teachers, but if you see that as a teacher, yes, you do not receive any support at home, that these parents don't come at the special meetings, parents' meetings, how can you deal with the problems of the children if you do not know what happens at home? If they are not encouraged to do the homework, even when you write it each time in the agenda. There are limits also to what you can reach as a teacher, and I think the educational community, that's what we now try to do with the broad schools, but that would go much further. The migration communities have a responsibility also in integrating migrants through education with additional support measures. And that's the idea of broad schools, to deal with the problems in society, because the school cannot alone solve these societal problems.
You mentioned before the problem of the autonomy of the schools. I wonder what is the system or the method of appointing teacher on a local basis, state basis, and more in general, before that, do you think that there is a connection between this process of appointing teacher and the problem of integration?
No, that's the education providers. We have Catholic schools with Muslim teachers as well. It took some time, because in order to become a teacher, you need to have the qualifications. So it means that special attention had to be dedicated to attracting people from the migrant community to enter the teaching profession in order to have diverse teaching staff. And that's a progress that is being made, but we still need to have more teachers with a migrant background to deal with the problems of integration of the pupils themselves. But I think that's going the right direction. No? Are you optimist?
It was just a quick question. Gracia, maybe you told us already, but I possibly didn't understood it. I understood that the parent have to accept the project, the denominational teaching project of the school. But it is not clear to me if the school can refuse the enrollment of a child, Catholic school enrollment of a Muslim child, or vice versa.
No, it's the parent. The first step in the registration is the decision of the parent. But the school can refuse apart from criteria that are not fulfilled, like, for example, the age, the minimum age, and all this issue, or whether the school is full. But full, that's not decided by the school itself. The school sets its criteria, and it's the database who controls. But the first step is the parents make the choice of school, and the school can only refuse the child if the parent refuses to sign the pedagogical project. So it's a balance of, okay, you make your choice, but then you are going to sign that you are going to respect the project of the school. That's the deal. So that's a contract that you make with the school, and this is why the issue of headscarves, normally it's written in the school plan, whether it's allowed in school, yes or no. And a parent sending the pupil to a school where it is written clearly in the school regulations that headscarves are not allowed, if a parent signs such a contract, then he should not come and complain later. So this is a kind of balancing exercise about the freedom to choose, but also the obligation to respect the pedagogical plan of the school, of the denominational school.
Maybe the pedagogical plan, but not the identity, because you know that if there is another creed, it would be difficult to accept.
Well, quite a lot of Muslim parents prefer to send the children to a school where belief, faith is still an issue.
It was the same in France after the veil cases.
Yes, yeah. So, and they prefer this than instead of sending their children to a public school where they are prepared to become non-believers, something secular.
So a wrong faith is better than no faith?
Well, public schools are freer. Of course, in public schools, that's very strange. They have all the religions being taught, but nevertheless, also an obligation to respect the others. And secular is one, and non-belief is also an issue. Atheist is also in that school present. So public schools, you have quite a lot of choices. You can make your choice, but you are obliged to respect the others. I see Jan disagrees with me, so I will be very happy.
we should open now a full debate on the Belgian, between brackets, the so-called Belgian model. Is it a model or is it definitely not? Again, education is the privileged domain of confronting fundamental rights and of the huge debate among role of the state versus in the state's interest versus the interest of civic society to some extent. The Islamic religion is recognized in Belgium in 1974. There are 6 other religions who are recognized with a full administrative status on payments of salaries, pensions, buildings, and so on and so on. When Herman Van Rompuy, I worked with him several years, as you do know, in a think tank, asked me in 1979 if it was lawful to admit Islam schools in Belgium, because he was definitely against that idea. I said, well, Herman, you're a good economist, but you are a very bad lawyer indeed. You are not any information, no expertise on law, and he accepted immediately. So, of course, we have the fundamental freedom, and we have the most refined, the most articulated constitutional norm on education rights and education freedoms, Europe-wide, and even outside Europe, I guess, if I know. So, again, of course, Islam is authorized to organize schools, but we definitely, well, Belgium opted for another strategy. In public schools, in governmental schools, in state schools, religion is organized again in 7 different religions, officially recognized. So also in the Islam religion, and there are many Islam learners who are following that religion who can follow that. But the question, of course, in a state, in a nation, in a community where more than 75% of all primary schools are Catholic, and more than 63% of secondary schools are Catholic, there's a problem. And there, one of these conflicting domains, quite interesting from constitutional and from educational law perspective, the legislator has to make choices. Is there a priority of the choice of the parent above the fundamental rights of the provider, according to the Dutch tradition? It is kind of a supremacy of the organizing body above the parent. The parent who should be aware of the rigidity of the mission of the non-governmental school in the Netherlands, and in Belgium it's slightly different, because indeed parents should subscribe to the project, educational mission, the charter, and so on. But there is a huge tendency from Catholic schools, mostly Catholic schools, who are weakening their identity. Opt out, giving possibility to opt out. There are many Islam learners who are not following religion anymore. So yes, multiculturality or multi-ethnicity is reflected in this choice in public schools, in this choice of 7. You can 2 hours a week. You have to choose, and even besides the 7, you have also the opting possibility for a non-confessional. So, according to some criticals, it is a more Freemason interpretation of morals. So, quite interesting confessional, ideological, philosophical debate indeed. And in schools, it's quite amazing. Multiculturality is, according to my opinion, mixed to interculturality. You have to respect this multiculturality before you can opt for but that's another debate. Yeah, probably, yeah, definitely. So what we do see now, opt out. So even for learners, so there is a directive of 2000, European directive, so binding, where on non-discrimination in labor and in vocational affairs, where you cannot be discriminated on religious grounds, even in non-governmental, between brackets, enterprises, instances subsidized, recognized by the state. You can do if, and then there is a quite long list of conditions. You have to make clear, you have to articulate your mission, your ethos, in that way that, yes, you can discriminate on religious grounds. And there is quite impressive research on this issue from comparative European. So, yes, you can discriminate, but how many cases, how many judgments we noticed last 20 years on firement by a Catholic school of a teacher? No one. Zero. There were some procedures in some Catholic schools on discipline and on ethos, but there are just a few of them, not that many. So the question remains on the credibility of your mission, of your project, of your confessionality, and in systems where the big majority is non-state, is non-governmental, but fully subsidized, and diploma are recognized in all evidence by the state, it's not that evident that you can keep alive your credibility. So that's also the discussion in Belgium. Or it's also in the French-speaking community, where also the majority is, after 10 years, is becoming now confessional and Catholic. So no time to go into, because there is now a whole system of local consultation procedures referring learners who are above certain percentage of population in the school where is not, that is not reaching the parameters of social, let's say mix, the social mix. Yeah, but I guess that will be for after the debates.
Yes, that was the issue of the registration decree, to create a social mix, not only to take care of the socially disadvantaged, but specifically to create a social mixed, social and ethnical mixed, I would say. And that raised, well, quite a lot of complaints, not officially, but of Catholic parents who said, well, we are Catholics, we still go to church and we find we are not registered. It's not possible under the present system anymore. There are a majority of Catholic schools, they are full of Muslims or atheists even. And as believers, we need to send our children to public schools because that database sends it to a public schools because they say, well, it doesn't matter because they will also receive religion, Catholic religion in that public school. But there is something else about the identity of a school. A public school is definitely more secular than these Christian Catholic schools. And what we see, that's a discussion by the bishops within the Catholic community, is should some schools be allowed to draw a strict Catholic pedagogical plan, yes or no, with attendance of churches, for example, and of course that will scare away the non-believers and Muslims or other religions. So these are the discussions going on, and the others say, no, Catholicism is an open religion. We are open to all creeds and all faiths. So I think in the Catholic community, Jan knows it much better. I'm not involved in these discussions, but Jan knows what are the options. Some bishops are in favor of even providing Islamic instruction, and in some Catholic schools, although it's against, I think, the law, the denominations, Islamic instruction is provided. When you have 95% of your school population from Islamic background, then some of the Catholic educational providers deem it reasonable to provide Islamic instruction. But you see, the issue will be raised, what kind of identity in the end does that school has? We will see in 10 years, as you see in Belgium, it takes 10 years and then evaluate and embark on a new policy, what we will do in 10 years. Thank you.
It might be interesting to try to test the Lautsi case law of the European Court of Human Rights in the Belgian environment, for instance. Because the court said, now the Italian government claimed that the crucifix in a school, in a classroom, is not indoctrination, is not religious indoctrinations, because the crucifix is not a religious symbol, but it's a symbol for human rights and democracy. So it is a national symbol, not a religious symbol. And the Court of Human Rights pretended that the government position was understandable and said, should there be indoctrination through the symbol, then this would be a violation of the convention. But because it is not indoctrination, then it is not a violation. Now, of course, this would be, I would say, rather incompatible with what you just said, yes, about, for instance, Catholic school teaching Islam, because that is indoctrination, isn't it?
Well,
but then, of course, parents have already agreed about, and so they don't have standing. Let's say they cannot go to court.
So they will be teaching. They will be teaching Islamic instructions in a schoolroom with a cross. That's how it happens, because in a Catholic school, in every class, you have the cross. And the parents making a choice to send their children to a Catholic school, they accept the presence of a crucifix in that state-funded, denominational, private Catholic school. So, as you say, they will not have a standing. They agreed, signed a contract by registration and by agreeing with the school project. And it is a kind of free service that they provide by allowing imams to come and instruct Islam, but it will happen in a room with a crucifix.
Yes, one more, and then I think we should pass on.
Yeah, I find it interesting that like in Belgium and the Netherlands, there's a strong preservation of religion in schools. So schools can oblige students to participate in religious instruction, while in a lot of other countries, there's very restriction about it, like in Italy. You can't force students, if your identity is religious, every child can well, go out of your religious class.
It is voluntary.
Yes.
Yes.
But that's because of the structure. When you have a majority, people have a choice. The majority of the educational systems in Europe is mainly public. Yes, and it means that public schools, also in Belgium, you will never find a cross in the classes.
No, but also subsidized non-governmental schools in a lot of other countries cannot ask students to participate. It's still voluntary, instead of Belgium and the Netherlands.
I love to break the law. So I made the law no more, but then I gave the floor to Marilyn.
Well, I just thought.
Break it again.
Well, thank you for breaking the law. I'm using my freedom of speech now again. Just another additional comment about your comment on Lautsi case, possibly in Belgian context. Well, court also made another point in that case, which I thought should have been the major point, but it was a minor point. It's the fact that the Italian schools, the openness or pluralism was there, and that's why it wasn't such a problem to have a crucifix there. So I'm really curious, as you are, how that argument would translate into the Belgian context, if ever it appears there. If in the Catholic school it is open for other religions as well, so everybody is basically there, we are somehow endorsing the pluralism in a kind of, maybe in a way with a twist, but I wonder how that argument would work there.
No, because the Catholic schools have the cross in the rooms.
Yeah.
So there is no need to come as a parent and say, well, you should remove that cross. Then you should have made another.
You're talking of private denominational schools, whereas Lautsi is...
Yes, well, it will not be an issue because there are no crosses in public schools. So no reason to... They are banned. You cannot put a cross or another religious symbol in public schools. So the issue will not arise there.
Yeah, but in terms of...
But don't forget the wide margin of national appreciation doctrine, which the court...
Yes.
It's because, well, you make your choice and take the consequences of your choice.
Somebody draws a difference between the crucifix and the cross, saying that the cross is also a Neoplatonic symbol. It's not necessarily a Christian symbol. True. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. The cross is different from the crucifix.
But just to add to your point, but in Catholic schools, do Muslim students have a right to wear their religious symbols?
Well, yes, it depends on the institute, but for example, the headscarf, no. That's in most, no, it's banned. Because at least you should see that also Catholic parents have their rights and they want their child to send to a Catholic school. And some are rather strict, and you should also respect their feelings. They choose for a Catholic school, and then, well, a Catholic school which is open. Some are open, yes, very open. But there are others also who say, but we still want the Catholic faith, at least to have a choice. This is a tradition. We fought for it years to have these Catholic schools established, and now, well, they are gone, or they are filled with other symbols. So it's on a permanent basis balancing the rights of the believers in a mostly secular society.
Last years, Belgium is following on concerning the public sector, the state sector, but also to some extent the sector of education system of provinces and communalities, is following the Turkish and the French model. Namely, banning of all religious symbols throughout the country. So politics and even the legislature, to some extent, is following the more laïc, the more secular interpretation of neutrality, where a couple of years ago there was another interpretation of pluralism, namely show differences. There is not a scandal to respect the multitude of religions in a public education setting. At the contrary, it is a sign of respect and of richdom of the cultural heritage of a country. Now, last year's, unfortunately, according to my opinion, it is more strict separation and not the idea of cooperative regime, but it is strict neutrality in the more French model. And that is also relevant for not just for, let's say, the collective sign of identity, but also for the individual. So learners, the kids are not permitted anymore to bear whatever religious symbol when they are entering the school door. No headscarves, no little crucifix or crosses, or from Jewish. So for many of them, it is a disaster.
All cross is allowed even in France.
Well, but that should be very, very small. So yeah.
Well, it must be under your shirt.
Well, yeah. You
out of the shirt, and it's big, just by definition. Yeah.
Still, it is huge. Still, it is a debate, but the tendency is rather for neutralizing, for prohibiting any religious identity in a public education setting, what, according to my opinion, is not in line with fundamental rights. But that's my private opinion.
But it's more in general, the differences. Also, there was an issue of homosexuals. They have the colors. So teachers of public services, when you are dealing with the public, you should not show your sexual orientation. That was also an issue. Well, somebody wearing the ring, you show. So these are endless. When you start...
And again, that is in contradiction with the fundamental human rights principle, namely the right to be different and to keep your identity alive. So if we do not respect that norm, yes, the state is overwhelming a certain interpretation, certain vision of pluralism, his vision. So quite interesting. These debates are clarifying. Yeah.
In fact, as lawyers, I think we should pay more attention to what Fabrizio suggested this morning about the legal situation of onus. Now, onus is not a right, is not a duty. Is a duty in order to achieve an advantage. You want this advantage, then you have to do this. And what's interesting is that he said this is based on solidarity. So that, for instance, you may think that there is solidarity among denominations. Let us denominations agree on what are the best rules in order to have a balance between preserving identity and, yes, encouraging mutual respect and understanding. But then, of course, you have to take into consideration also non-believers, also secularism, also atheism, something which is done in your countries and is not done in my country, where it seems that there is no, that either you are religious or you don't exist, you know. In particular, and this is again, it happens in France also, and I think in Switzerland, we have a system of agreement between organized religions and the state. The concordat, yes, exactly. You can't have a concordat with the world of rationalists, atheists, and secularists. And I know that even in France, there is a decision by the Conseil d'État, which said that there is no right. And even in Italy, the Association of Rationalists and Atheists tried to, went to court and said, why do you have an agreement with the Jehovah's Witnesses and not with us? And the court said no, because you're, but then when it comes to, for instance, the religious formula of oath in a court for witnesses, then the court acknowledged that you cannot force a religious formula. You have to allow also a formula for those who are not believers, because otherwise you pretend that they oath on something that they don't believe in, and so there will be a fake. I really think that we ought to consider a seminar on the application of Lao Tzu in different environments and different systems, because that's quite interesting. I read somewhere, in the book we're going to comment if we have time, about the European model. This is a very pluralistic European model, if there is any model at all. Okay, so thank you very much. I think we are prepared when you want to entertain us.
The talk show goes on.
Lovely. You have 25 minutes. Is that sufficient?
Depends on you.
Okay. All of you know that at 6, we should have coffee break at 6:30. We can leave the room at 6:35, but we should leave. Thank you very much. I thank you in advance. Isn't that nice of me?
Not knowing what you get.
I found it interesting that for 2,000 years now, at least, European societies or world societies quarrel with this question of society and religion, but in a way we don't get along. Still open. It's interesting because that's a model for the relationship between the state and other societal problems. In one of Gracienne's last statements, she ended saying the educational system cannot solve the problems of the society. And I think this is completely right, and the opposite is also right, which means that education reflects the societal problems. And in David's statement, he's not here anymore today, I found 2 really brilliant examples for this statement. The first is the importance of the housing pattern for school achievement. And indeed, we all know from the empirical data that the housing pattern, the settlement behavior of the migrants is one of the determinants of school attainment, and we cannot control it. Liberal societies cannot control these problems from outside the system, the educational system, the effects on the educational system. In the 50s and 60s, Germany at least had still an administrative housing policy, which means at that time they didn't, because migrants were just pouring in the early 60s. But not in the 50s, we had the refugees. It was a problem of need. But at that time, you had the possibility to regulate the housing market. Nowadays, you don't have it anymore. The only problem, the only way to solve it would be busing. But as you all know, in Europe, busing has no chance. So this is one of the examples that the basic educational problems are controlled by outside social decisions or social political decisions. The other example was in David's empirical data, the fact that he always said the longer the academic track is, the better. And the vocational track is a failure. This is one of the basic assumptions of the sociologists. So I wonder why that is so. This reflects, in fact, the wages on the labor market. It's quite clear that as long as academic tracks and the investment in academic tracks leads to more earnings on the labor market, then the choice of the parents and the students will be alike. And then you have this kind of sorting. So if you intervene into the labor market and the wages, then there might be an alternative. But again, in our societies, it's not possible. The government cannot do that. So Peter and I will now not talk about these external factors which determine the educational system, but about internal educational factors. And we will talk about what we call the proportionality principle. And we start this time with two cases. And both relate to the problem of quotas, proportions within the structure of the educational system. The first case happened, I think, 2 weeks ago in Berlin, and runs as follows. In a gymnasium in, I think, in Neukölln.
Berlin again.
Neukölln again, one of the migrant and lower class districts of Berlin. 3 Turkish boys failed the gymnasium and had to leave. And they didn't want to leave, but they went to court, asking the court to decide that their dismissal was unconstitutional. Why? They said that the composition of the school body in parallel classes was different. In the class of one of the 3 boys who sued the government, they had more than 60% migrants, whereas in one of the other parallel classes, they only had 14%. 14% of migrants, and all the others, so more than 80%, 86% being German natives. And so the attorney said, or the lawyer said, this was the reason why they failed, or why he failed. The director of the school, I was asked by the judge, so why is that so? And there's a very simple explanation for it, because the class with only 14% of migrants was the class with Latin. And German natives more often choose classes with Latin than other migrants do. Therefore, it was so different. So this is a decision, the school system, that you can choose Latin, and this has this consequence. And of course, we remember to Brown versus Board of Education and the composition of the school classes. The second case is not a case, but is a kind of suggestion. And this suggestion would be as follows. If 100% of the school population in a public school is of German native background, the instruction in the school is 100% in German. If 50% of the school population is Turkish, 50% of the instruction is in Turkish language. And so, following the proportionality principle, you could apply this to solve the language problem. So, in the first case, proportionality of the school population composition. In the second case, language of instruction in the schools.
Yeah, and the answer the answer for the first case, which I have to give, is that the school didn't do anything wrong, because Latin is Latin, and everybody had been free to choose also Latin. And if they haven't, these 3 migrant pupils in a migrant class, don't forget, that was the case. Migrants against migrants, one could say. If they have not chosen Latin, they could not wonder that they are together with these others who have not chosen Latin by reasons maybe because of their ethical background. And the second idea of us, this is lovely, good idea, but I know from other circumstances, criminal law, where the police have to give everybody the description of his rights in his own language, which is international and European law, they are, at least in Berlin, not able to have all these formulas, because we do have so many languages in Berlin that the police could not fulfill the obligations. If I think about single cases with the police and add this to the idea that we have proportionality with the languages in the school, and come back to the Hoover School we had that morning, where 90% have different languages, you can think that we have perhaps a relation of 3% Palestinians, 4% Egypts, 5% from Morocco, and 43 from Russia, and what's the rest? Can't tell you. Something 40. Something 40, and then you need teachers who can speak these languages. What to do with the other pupils? Should these Arab pupils learn Russian to follow the instruction, or what do you think about that? Shortly said, the idea is lovely. It's proportional for Jan de Groof in a perfect way, but has nothing to do with the just reality of school life. And that shows, on the other hand, that dealing, and therefore that case may be helpful, that dealing with proportionality in a strict way is, at least if you have a construction like schools, where you have not the situation one teacher, one pupil, but you have classes of different backgrounds, different pupils, ethnical, and so on and so on. You have to limit what proportionality means. Otherwise, you can't organize schooling. And if you are not in Berlin, but in the countryside somewhere, which also may happen where you need every pupil to get a class together. This is...
Of course, the second case or suggestion is highly irrational. It's not meant...
We did not know.
It's not meant as it runs here. It is of symbolic value, I would say. And the symbolic value would be that why don't we start to have in a school with a majority of Turkish or Arabic children, and we have these schools in Berlin in 8 areas where the majority, more than 80%, are from the 80% half Arabic and half Turkish. Why don't we have at least, let's say, 1 or 2 hours a week on Turkish or Arabic history in Arabic or Turkish language? That would mean that the Turks have to listen to Arabic, and the German, the 20%, would learn something about the Turkish language and the Turkish history. So this would change the public awareness of what goes on in school. We don't have this at all. We have sometimes Turkish as a second language, but only for the Turks, of course, not for the Germans.
Don't forget history.
Yeah.
Don't forget history.
The German could choose.
They can choose, but nobody does.
Okay. With migrants, sorry, we started in the 60s, and that had been Italians.
Sure, yeah.
And 1612, 68 is maybe a figure some of our colleagues in that room still remember. And if I still remember Article 12 of 1612, 1968, they have a right to get educated in their language and culture. And that's European law from the very early beginning. And we discussed that with the Italian, the Greek communities. We had that 2 models, at least in Germany, on one hand run by the state, on the other hand run by the missions and embassies.
where they gave that cultural background instruction in the afternoon, extracurricular, but it worked. Nowadays we have the other situation that the Tuscany fraction, or how to tell these people in Germany, always order due cappuccini, to show that they have learned a little bit from their Italy holidays or something like that. So Italian had to be accepted. And the examples we have are Arabic, are Moroccan, are Turkish, all these outside the European community. We don't talk about English people, we don't talk about the French, we don't talk about anymore about, sorry, but people from the Netherlands don't care, because they are integrated in a complete way and they don't ask for, at least in Bremen, they don't ask for anything which has to do with their own culture, because we have the same. So 1612, 68, I only want to remember that already in 68 it had been written down by the European institutions that we should take care on that and have a right. If the way how at least our country did it was a perfect way, I doubt. But there had been a step forward. Now we don't discuss anymore the inner European situation. We discuss, like you did, Morocco, Indonesia in the Netherlands, Malaysians, these people. We discuss the Russians, or the German Russians coming back from Russia to Germany, being German. And isn't there a chance to do anything in the direction Ingo just started? But the difference is, since 68, it was legally binding. Now we are discussing about offers, shouldn't one, couldn't one, and something like that. So we have a different legal situation. Coming back to the point you normally pointing out here, look at the legal basis. And there had been perhaps a model, or an idea in direction of a model, say it very...
If I may, still it was not linked to any proportionality.
No, not at all.
It was absolutely,
no.
Yeah. Whereas here you raised also the issue of
yes, we go a step forward.
Because it might help, but it doesn't, of course. Yeah.
The interest in the first case is that a Turkish boy complains there are too many Turks in the class. This reminds me of my mother-in-law, who took heart surgery at the age of 92. And she came in Switzerland to a wonderful resort on the Lake of Constance. And we said, isn't it wonderful, this park? She said, yes, it's wonderful, but all old people.
The case came to the court, and the court decided on 26th of September. So we brought the very newest thing we can bring from Berlin.
No right to a special composition of the classroom.
But they allowed appealing. So we have to wait what will happen at the higher court of...
there's no answer. But I wonder what the answer would be if it comes to a criminal court jury. Because that sooner or later the issue will come. Huh? The ethnic composition of a jury in a criminal trial.
In the States?
Yeah, in the States,
yes.
exactly.
We have that. We have had that.
Oh, you do?
Now with the Florida case.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Reality can be more powerful than fiction.
No.
It was a wonderful...
More powerful than reality.
It was a great play. But may I just raise some comments and question, of course. Proportionality is like in the South African constitution, there is a norm, practicability. And what is practicable? Proportionality is just one of the criteria. You do know that, because you are not just actors and violin players and whatever, but also lawyers. So you have also other criteria who are even more powerful and not that fictive at all. First, is the difference, the discrimination, is the norm, is it objective? Yes, it is. It is an objective norm. Nationality, ethnicity is an objective norm. Is it relevant? Big question. Is it lawful? No, it is not. So proportionality is one of the four or the five possible criteria we should plate for, let's say, a holistic approach. And even the question on alternatives should also be raised. But may I raise you a question? Do you think is only a uniform approach an option, or taking into account several neighborhoods in the Berlin area? You say, well, local needs and local realities are completely different from one neighborhood to another, and there is no need for one uniform approach Berlin-wide. Do you think it is affordable, according to legal norms, to make well, all these 4 or 5 criteria alive per sector or in a specific neighborhood, or do you think it's unconstitutional or not in line with legal culture to have a different approach per neighborhood?
Who makes the decision?
Yes, I was going to ask.
Well, there are examples. There are local authorities.
How about by institute?
Local authorities.
Like in Bayern with the crucifix, but that is decided by the school, isn't it? By the majority of
English model. So there is a local educational authority who has very far-reaching binding authorities.
So if you look at the German constitutional situation, it's as follows, that the decisions on the curriculum, the language, and on the composition of the school body is made by the land, by the state. So what has the state to take into account? It has to take into account the rights of the parents, has the practicability, the composition of the school body, the ethnic diversity, and the curriculum. So indeed, the state is free to choose several approaches, but the state has to balance them. This is constitutional law under the decisions of the Federal Constitutional Court. So there is no strict control of these principles. There's no, let's say, overwhelming priority principle. Particularly if there are several competing fundamental rights in the case. Then we call this praktische Konkordanz. This was invented by a law professor from Freiburg who was later a constitutional court lawyer called Hesse, and the court adopted this. And the court decisions now more and more in the last 20 years are based on the so-called principle of proportionality, which in German is Verhältnismäßigkeitsprinzip. It's a little bit different than proportionality. And because Verhältnis means relation, but also situation. And I had a colleague in constitutional law who's dead now. He was a cynic in a way, saying Verhältnismäßigkeitsprinzip, or what is it? It's like the Verhältnis sind, wie die Situation ist. So saying that there is no rationality anymore. And I think that one of the main principles is when you balance all these principles, that through jurisprudence, more and more you get, let's say, case law in German constitutional law. And of course, the most prominent case for our case here is the Brown case. In the Brown case, the Brown court said literally an all-white classroom is, I cite the words, inherently unequal. Inherently unequal. So if we apply this to our case, what would be the consequence?
And to say it the other way around, as Ingo pointed out, the case happened, this concrete case from September, happened in a gymnasium in Neukölln, which is an area of high migrants. If you want to mix Berlin, only Berlin, you have to find an idea how to bring either migrant children to the white parts of Berlin, say it this way, southwestern parts of Berlin, by busing, by attracting them somehow, incentives.
Every government would lose the elections at once.
Sure, but yeah, but that's one way. The other way is that you send the whites, say it this way in brackets, to the black areas where the Muslims are, to Neukölln, for example. And another way would be that you do something with money, put much more money into the disadvantaged areas, including the schools. We had that case. We had that case where one of the schools just used the press, quite successful, but that you can do only once. But if you do that, something to do with equality, that you say, okay, you stay with 35 people in the gymnasium in the better areas of Berlin, and we make 15 in the inner city areas because of the bad situation or disadvantaged situation of the pupils and their families. So, 35 in one class, less teachers, less money, and spend the money somewhere else. I think, or I couldn't guarantee that one of the German law courts get the idea that this is not in line with the principle of equality. If it's like this, if it's 29 to 32, don't care, but 15 to 35, and that must be a radical idea. I still remember that we proposed once that the Commission for Berlin in the late 2010s, 8, 9, something like that. That was the only thing that the press have looked at, and then the proposal was gone.
We have the duty to treat unequals unequally.
Yeah.
Right? That is a duty, an obligation, state obligation.
I agree completely.
And to fulfill, not just to respect, to protect, and to promote, but to fulfill. Yeah. That's human right.
Yeah.
So,
we're discussing not law, we're discussing politics.
Well, politics and law,
Politics is politics.
Both sides of the same coin.
No.
Both sides of the same coin. So it is not an option to have no legal answers or in line with the Constitution. So we have to be creative.
Yeah. So, okay, I give you the case of my neighborhood. 10 minutes from my home, there's a school with 3 parallel classes. And the school decided to have 2 classes, 100% foreign migrants, and in the 3rd class, 15% of German native origin. So why did they do this? Because at the school council, the parents of the 15% said, if you mix these 15% all over the 3 classes, then we will leave, and then we apply for other schools. So how can you solve this with equality principle?
If you have the right...
Let them choose and leave.
Yes, choose and
Exactly.
leave.
Let them choose
Exactly.
and
That is
Choose and leave. And then?
And then you have 40% Arabic and 40% Turkish.
We have schools that had to be closed because of their...
It happened. It happened, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago here in Italy, close to Milan, in 2 schools. Parents said there were too many migrant students, and they were not so many, because I think it was 2 classes and the migrants were perhaps, I don't know, 10 children, and the parents refused to send the native students to school.
What happened?
Yes,
Were they allowed?
twice.
They were
Twice, yes. I think it was an elementary school, perhaps. And in one class, I think it was half of the total number of the students were migrants.
Yeah.
And in the second class, it was a minority.
I hate to go into politics, but we shouldn't forget that in Milan there is one political party which is rather strong, not as strong as it used to be, but perhaps these families were militant of the Northern League.
Yes, yes.
Might be, and of course they have an ideological attitude which is against.
Jan,
They refuse to send their children home. Their children
but
to
I would add to Jan's question. Jan, this is point one, that we have a free choice of the parents. But in reality, if you want to have a school without migrant children, you have two options. The one is you offer Latin and perhaps later Greek. Then you can be quite sure that only German parents will choose. And the second option is, which is quite easy, you make a school with musician as a central point. Music and not musician. Music as a central point. And you only ask the pupils that they must play an instrument. The best one is the piano. That is the entrance condition for everybody.
It is the best example of an indirect.
Exactly.
You can imagine.
Exactly.
And unlawful.
And there's a third alternative.
But you could make a statement that is unlawful.
It's not unlawful.
There's a third option.
Unless, of course, it is a music-based school.
Yeah, sure. Sure. It's a music-based school. Sure.
The third option would be send the kids to England, to schools with 40% foreigners from the Indian and the South African upper class.
Yeah, but Jan, to give you the last example which happened and the Federal Administrative Court just decided, in Potsdam, they wanted to found a gymnasium only for boys, Catholic private school, run by Opus Dei.
We have co-education.
They succeeded.
Have Turkish boys, I think.
I'm quite sure. You're of these soulless persons, as we learned that morning here in Trento, and you Potsdam beside everything. There aren't any Turkish children around in Potsdam.
It's really the trend.
But what you do? The Federal Administrative Court said co-education is a nice aim, but not fundamental. So you have the right to found that. They are just in the process of founding the school.
And be funded with public money.
Funded with public money, and they say quite open.
I would say this is quite unusual.
I only tell you the ways how you solve. Jan.
In a country, Germany is one of the only countries where home education is constitutionally not accepted. Yeah. Most other European countries, there is a totally different system. So in that country, in the nation's interest, right? How can you pretend that is acceptable, funded by the government? If it is private, no problem. That's their affair. But it is so inconsistent. Your stories are so incoherent.
I don't see your problem.
That's why
we do not make the decisions.
That is why life is richer than imagination.
But as a constitutionalist, I would say this is the effect of the freedom of choice.
Yeah.
And you cannot limit that in order to have state planned schools. You cannot do that.
You could bind your conditions for subsidization and for recognition of diploma. You could bind this to an additional requirement, namely the integration and blah blah blah.
Yeah, but
so
that
it is
Jan,
true. If it is private for private,
the best,
no problem.
Even about integration, you have discussion. Most parents think that integration is best served by good education, and so they are searching for the school that is best for the children. And if it's a white school, a lot of parents say, yes, but I want to have good education for my child.
Yep.
I'm afraid any different attitude would imply a change of legislation because it pays electorally, as you suggested. I'm afraid this is not a good time to. It's better to have good legislation and some not good enforcement of legislation. Because if you pretend to have excellent legislation, in the year 2013 you would have worse legislation, not better legislation.
But we have the constitution above
No, I said it's politics, and I'm sorry to say it is.
So again, we need Europe.
Yeah.
We have the
May I?
constitution, and the constitution
Ingo.
is politics in the regulation of law.
Yes, okay.
Antonio, yes. I would suggest to transfer the question. I am involved with the issues of multicultural issues in society and education, especially since '94, and I don't see this question as the bottleneck. I don't see it as a sign of if it's going good or wrong. It depends on other variables. One of the best variables, I think, is the diversity of the teacher population. And if I go to see in the Netherlands, I see a lot of migrant teachers starting. Not enough, but they start. But a lot of them go out, and you can say, well, that's because of they are not good enough or what else. No, there's a lot of factors around this issue which are relating to problems which express in black schools, which we feel it's not only healthy, but to say it's not healthy per se is discriminative also.
I agree with the hope of teacher education, but I learned if somebody who's starting teacher education today will have finished his education by, let's say, in 6 years and be in the schools in 7 or 8 years. And for me, the problem is what we do in between.
Yes, but this problem was also known 20 years ago.
Yeah,
so this is
the
not a
point.
good point what you're saying now.
That's
because
the
this
point.
problem will also be 20 years from now on, still.
I would like to
And it's not about teacher training, it's about the culture that teachers go out, that they drop out. And that's not about training, that is about the culture of cooperation, of recognition, of respect, of dialogue, of learning from each other, of positive behavior.
But then you have to look at the teachers who are in the system already now.
Yeah, of course.
I suggest that we continue talking. I don't want to break the conversation, but to suggest that we continue talking over a cup of coffee. And because we show to be so energetic, we should all have a decaffeinated coffee. So this is, I think, the first decaffeinated coffee break, okay? It's a decaffeinated Italian coffee break. And we meet here in 18 minutes, okay?